I grew up in almost South Central Los Angeles. You know, Los Angeles, the original street was Olvera Street. Alameda runs right alongside of it, goes all the way to San Pedro. If you went straight south from the Central Street in LA, down Alameda, I lived 3 blocks off of Alameda between Florence and Firestone. If you saw the movie Bloods and Crips Made in America, the documentary about how the gang started in LA, the first gang was called the Slauson Street Club. The police started calling it a gang. So it was a Slauson Street gang. My high school was on Slauson Street. And I played high school football with guys that got free televisions during the Watts riots. And a guy was shot in the leg at the end of my street. It's interesting though, because they got free TV, so now I could watch color TV. It was kind of nice, it wasn't all that bad. You have to think about it. But I grew up there. People didn't go to college, many from where I grew up. Some did, but not many. I didn't really have any interest. I wanted to play sports, so I went to college to play football. And I ended up getting accepted to a school that I think at that time you had 2 options. They would accept you. You had to pay tuition and you had to breathe. They would negotiate the breathing part, but the tuition was non-negotiable. So I got accepted on probation. And I went there, and the first week I was there, my older brother, who was a Christian, invited me to a Campus Crusade for Christ meeting, and I heard the gospel, and it blew me away. I didn't know that I could be loved by the God of the universe unconditionally. What does the Hound of Heaven by Francis Thompson, he says, human love demands human meriting. How hast thou merited? Of all man's dingiest clay, thou art the dingiest clot. Whom wilt thou find to love ignoble thee, save me, save only me? And when I heard that God loved me like that, I just freaked out. And that he forgave me of my sins. Nobody had to tell me I was a sinner. I was too well aware. And it was good news for me. So I became a Christian, and I made it my goal to share Christ with every guy I played football with in college. And every year I'd share with them all. I saw about 15 guys a season come to faith. Some of them went on to really live strong lives for Christ. Some of them just sort of wimped along over the years and so on. But nevertheless, my friends would ask me questions, and I never heard of these questions. I never asked them. If God's good and all powerful, why does evil exist in the universe? I had never once asked that question before I was a Christian. I'm ashamed to say it. I've written a book about it. It's a matter that concerns me. But my friends asked the questions, and I'd say, I don't know the answer to that. But I won't leave a stone unturned until I can find a substantive answer that will help you. I don't know if we ever get to the last word on any of these questions, because we're such pea brains, and we're talking about big things. Remember Lucy? She says to Aslan when she encounters him the first time, the Christ figure, the Lion of Narnia, when she encounters him for the first time on her second visit to Narnia and Prince Caspian, she says, Aslan, you're bigger. He says, oh, no, child, I am not. But every year you grow, you'll find me bigger. And every attempt we make to answer these questions, people ask, we keep finding God's bigger. And my faith was growing. I would dig for the answers to the questions. I would go to my friends and I'd say, remember when you asked me that question? Your life really matters to me. And I went and dug, and this is what I found. How could they refuse listening to your answer when they asked you the question and you did all that work to help them with the answer? Sometimes they'd just ask another question, but every time they asked the question, as I dug, I started growing in my faith. Many times they asked the question, and when I share with them the answer, they trusted Christ. But a lot of times in the literature, I saw a name crop up, C.S. Lewis. Who's this guy? I liked his answers that I read as people were quoting him. My older sister was a Christian, and she was reading Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe to the 5th grade class she was teaching at her school. And she told me one night when I was visiting her over dinner, the plot of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I said, what, there's books like this? And I think I read 6 books before I went to college, not counting comic books. And all of a sudden, I read through the Bible from cover to cover, something I've tried to do every year since. And I start reading Lewis voraciously. And I read Surprised by Joy, his autobiography. And that's the book that hooked me, because he talked about the deep longings of his heart and the quest to find the object of that longing. I knew the longings existentially. He gave me a vocabulary for my own soul. There was a professor at Whittier College where I attended, and there were only three professors who I knew who were Christians. And this philosophy professor was very respected, and he was requiring some Lewis books for his classes. So I basically majored in that professor. I wasn't a philosophy major, I was a PE major, but I had enough units for a minor in philosophy, except for one Eastern religion class where I would have had that minor. But this guy really helped me too. So I go to seminary. They had the seminary I went to, Talbot Graduate School of Theology. They accepted a few students on probation. I mean, my academic interest in college was to stay eligible. I didn't know how to spell it, but it meant everything. and, and so I had grades to keep me eligible, but not grades to get into grad school. But Talbot said they would set aside a few people that they would let in on probation because maybe God was doing a work in their life and maybe they were a late bloomer or something like that. I think I took the entire quota when I came to Talbot. So they let me in. And when I got in, I did better in grad school, but I had to write a thesis. And there was no way I was going to write a thesis on the use of the optative mood in the Greek text of Philemon. It just wasn't going to work. But they said I could write on C.S. Lewis. So I wrote on C.S. Lewis. So that was the first time I put pen to paper about Lewis. And then I started writing on him. Eventually, I did my doctorate on Lewis and started lecturing on him. And I used to teach a course at Biola University on C.S. Lewis. I actually taught there for about 32 years as a visiting professor. But I taught a class every semester for that. At that time, I was living in Santa Barbara. If you believe in Jesus, when you die, you go to Santa Barbara. I would drive down once a week, and every semester taught a class. I'd have 200 students in that class every semester. I had 1,600 students in 4 years in that class. And I started teaching on Lewis. I taught at him in a community college here in Illinois back when I was pastoring for 10 years, Lewis courses. And then when I came to Wheaton, of course, I was teaching Lewis every semester. And again, I've lectured on him at 79 universities in 19 different countries. And it's interesting to me because I still think of myself as that inner city kid who was a PE major. We're defined by our early experience. But if nobody was interested in Lewis, I'd be all in. And he opens more than wardrobe doors. Lewis was for me, my skeletal structure through the liberal arts. You read Lewis, he's so persuasive, but he doesn't persuade by coercing. He persuades by standing shoulder to shoulder with his readers, and he defines and describes things in such a way that you're fascinated by the things he's talking about. So through Lewis, I started reading Homer. I started reading Plato, Aristotle, started reading the early church fathers, reading Athanasius, reading Augustine, reading Aquinas, reading Dante, my word, reading Chaucer and Milton and Philip Sidney and Edmund Spenser and Milton. I think, did I say Milton already? Shakespeare. All these authors, you keep reading. Then his near contemporaries, George MacDonald, G.K. Chesterton, Tolkien, Charles Williams, my heavens. And the whole thing has been a liberal arts opportunity for me, but it's been breathtaking. Every step of the way, it's filled with wonder. G.K. Chesterton once said, "The world will never starve for want of wonders, only for want of wonder." And Lewis opens up wonder. He feeds your curiosities, and curiosity should always lead to the quest for answers. These answers should lead to awe and wonder should always break forth in worship. So he's been a wonderful experience. Boethius, too, I have to mention Boethius. Lewis said that he was the most influential author on medieval literature after the Bible. And he said a person wasn't considered educated up to 200 years ago, I think it was. He said 150, but let's give it some extra time.
Yeah.
If they didn't know Boethius. And it's true. You read Milton, you read Chaucer, Chaucer has one character in Troilus and Cressida, Pander, who recounts the entire argument of the book. Dante is referring to Boethius. They're all referring to Boethius. Nobody even reads him. Nobody even knows he exists anymore. And I think the reason why is because the Enlightenment put up a mesh that filtered out a lot of these great authors of the past. We don't read them. It's unfortunate. We're bereft. It's our poverty. We're impoverished because we don't read all of these authors. But nevertheless, Boethius, I'd count him one of the top 10 books I've ever read, his Consolation of Philosophy. So anyway, that's kind of my story, you know. And I ended up getting my doctorate. I did my doctorate in the Open University through the Oxford Center for Mission Studies. But my two first supervisors were Basil Mitchell, who was the Oxford University philosopher, and Lyle Dorset, who was a great C.S. Lewis scholar. And then for the last draft of my thesis, I had two rhetoricians help me hone the argument. Steve Beebe, a brilliant communication theorist, and also Jeff Davis, who's the dean of the humanities here at Wheaton College. So that's kind of my story. I'm married to Claudia, my wife. It'll be 48 years in January, and we have 4 kids, 4 married children, and 15 grandchildren. So at Christmas, we have to decide, do we buy the grandkids presents or do we make the house payment? So my wife and I are going to move into a tent.